Logan the Layman Critic here. Today's review is for Death Wish 3. It's from 1985, directed by Michael Winner, and stars Charles Bronson. Let's talk movies. Paul Kersey is returned home to aid a friend, only to find him murdered. Moments later, Kersey is arrested by the police. Chief Schreiker makes Kersey a deal and releases him out on the streets as a vigilante under the police department's unofficial jurisdiction. But, unlike the other times before, Kersey isn't just fighting for his own ends, but for the entire neighborhood that's being terrorized by the local gangs. I didn't anticipate that I would say this, but I think Death Wish 3 is my favorite of the series so far. And that's not to say that it's the best. I would say that the original is objectively better as a film, but Death Wish 3 is the most entertaining. I had fun watching it. The other two, while they had their share of enjoyable moments, they could put me off with their content. This one didn't linger on rape scenes for shock value. And as far as I know, I wasn't watching an alternate cut. This one is just pure carnage and gunfire, and it's so over the top with the action. I will admit that the setup is pretty contrived. You have yet another person close to Paul Kersey who is killed, which sets him off on yet another vigilante rampage. It would have been better if the film had just picked up from the last, where he's still in the streets and he just happens to get caught one night, and then you more or less would keep the remaining plot as it is. But I digress. This is Death Wish. If you know Paul Kersey, there's a 98% chance that you've got a body bag in your future. I've heard people say that Bronson is phoning in his performance with this sequel, and that may be true. I don't think it's any big secret that he wasn't fond of doing these movies. I think after the first one, he really didn't want to keep doing sequels. I think he wanted to do more substantive films. But personally, I see the character as having settled into being a vigilante. It's who he is now. He's made peace with it. Now, as far as Kersey being transformed into an urban Rambo for this century, well, I mean, this was 1985. Rambo First Blood Part 2 came out earlier that year and was one of the highest grossing films that year. I think it was the second. I think it was number 2. The year before that, you had a sleeper hit in The Terminator. And so if Death Wish was going to compete, it would have to change with the times. And whew, boy, does it. This film loves its guns. Kersey's signature weapon in this film is a Wildy 475 handgun. And this monster is intended for big game hunting, but he finds it just as useful on street punks. In the last quarter of the movie, you have this big street battle. Kersey takes up a Browning machine gun from World War II and opens up on the gang. You got neighborhood families that are inspired to take up arms and fight back. And the cherry on top is an M72 Law rocket launcher, which apparently doesn't cause you to go deaf when you shoot it in an apartment at a close range target. It doesn't make sense, but, what the heck. It's Death Wish. Regarding the film's politics, funny enough, for, being a more dumbed-down sequel, I would say that Death Wish 3 is probably the first to have anything discernible as a position. It seems almost certainly to be a pro-gun picture. The cops seize the tenants' firearms, leaving them free to be victimized, and the police themselves are pretty much impotent, having to rely on Kersey and later the neighborhood to defend against the criminals. I guess the only question is, how pro-gun is it? I mean, should citizens be allowed to use machine guns and anti-tank weaponry, or is this cinematic hyperbole that exists purely for entertainment's sake? I lean toward the latter. The cast is decent. Kersey's boss, I guess, Schreiker, he's played by Ed Lauter, who starts off as this sort of abusive police chief, but gradually becomes likable as he proves to be an invaluable ally. And towards the end, he joins in the shootout, and it briefly kind of turns into a buddy film. I like the character, although he has this strange fascination with using the word dude, which is never really explained. Because this is an older guy. He's not Bronson's age, but, he's probably like middle age. He's balding. He doesn't look like somebody that would be using the word dude. Speaking of old, okay, so the love interest, Catherine, is played by Deborah Raffin, and she's a lawyer that chases after Kersey for reasons. Much like the dead friend, this is a contrived aspect of the film. She's just there to be another person that gets close to Kersey and then killed off. Her performance is fine, but she's just way, way too young for Charles Bronson. I mean, the age gap, it's like really stretching the line. That suspension of disbelief that line is getting really, really thin. The villain, Fraker, is played by Gavin O'Herlihy. The previous two movies didn't have a central villain, so he's naturally going to be more memorable for that reason. I generally like O'Herlihy, having first saw him in Willow. And then he's also done other stuff like Superman 3, Never Say Never Again. If you're really into trivia, he plays the one brother on Happy Days that goes up into his room, and then you never see him for the remainder of the series. They don't even speak his name or mention that he exists. But he's suitably evil here, and his cartoonish look kind of serves the film's tone well. All the gang members have like these not really tattoos, it's like face paint. It's like across the forehead, like these two lines and like a red line through it, I think. I can't remember exactly, but it just, these multi-ethnic gangs, which probably would never have existed, particularly back then and in New York, you would think they would be much more tribal, I guess you could say, ethnically homogenous, just because you have all that animosity that's there between people. So if you're looking for some 80s action, Death Wish 3, it's not the best out there. Certainly Stallone and Schwarzenegger have some far better crafted pictures from that era. And even for Canon Films, which made these sequels, I would say that a movie like Cobra is superior. But this movie is thoroughly entertaining in its own right, and while I think it could serve as a satisfying conclusion to the Death Wish series, it can be appreciated independent from the preceding entries. You can just watch this on its own. If you've never seen any of the Death Wish movies, you could probably watch this and still enjoy it for what it is. Now I just need to check out the last two sequels. So, stay tuned and thanks for watching.